Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 108 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight, well, we're joined by Grip, Fang, and Wolf.
They're just looking for some gnawed rinds and cracked bones. Good doggies.
Yep.
Folks, we'll head over to the common room, or maybe Maggot's kitchen this time, in just a moment.
There you go.
But first, I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, who'll go back where he belongs double quick, Alan Sisto.
That hissing sound you hear is me laughing. Folks, today we will experience a little hobbit hospitality at the home of Farmer Maggot,
As well as a little hobbit ingenuity and mushrooms.
which are only palatable if bacon, large quantities of bacon, are involved.
You don't like mushrooms?
Not especially, no.
I mean, I didn't always like them, but I eventually started eating them on pizza and with steak, and I don't know. I mean, now I've gotten a bit more adventurous. There's still some varieties I can't bring myself to eat, but
You're practically a foodie compared to me, so.
yeah, that's probably true. But I mean, it's taken me a long time to kind of get to this point, just to be able to eat a few varieties of mushrooms. But
There you go.
boy, I digress, and that didn't take long.
Really early. Didn't even take a minute this time, yeah.
No. Speaking of something that did take a long time, this next segment has been waiting several months to make its appearance on the show.
It's been such a long time.
There you go.
I think I should be going.
Going back further than the 90s for that reference. I
Oh,
like
yeah,
that.
that's off Boston's first album. That's 79,
70s,
man.
isn't it? Yeah.
79, yeah.
Yeah.
And no, I didn't listen to it on the radio when it first came out. I became a fan of Boston later on,
Later on.
86 with Third Stage, yeah.
Okay, well, there you go.
I was 4.
Alan's history with Boston finally delved into on the Prancing Pony Podcast.
All right, back on track.
Within 2 minutes.
There you go.
No, so coming clean here, I think our listeners know that the North Wing segments are pre-recorded separately from the rest of the show they appear in.
No,
We
really?
usually like to pretend they're not, and folks are very gracious about letting us keep that facade up. But
Right.
this time around, there is no hiding it.
No.
This segment of the North Wing that you're about to hear was recorded live from Mythmoot
Well, back in June.
last year, wasn't it? It was back in June.
Oh, yeah. You're right. I mean, we're recording this in 2018, but you're right. It's
So
yeah.
so June 2018, and it was recorded in a room with 3 of us sitting around a table. So it's just not our usual sound quality, folks.
No, not quite. And we had to use our little portable field recorder. I think it was the first time we'd used that, and
Yeah.
we didn't have separate mics, so we were all just using the shared mic there. But it'll work.
Yeah. It'll work, and I hope you'll enjoy it because it is a very special friend of the show that we're welcoming here today.
That is true. Today we're bringing you another new installment of the North Wing.
Just like the North Wing at the Prancing Pony Inn, which had a room or two made special for hobbits, we've got some room especially for some of our listeners. Give us a chance to get to know them.
That's right. Now, rooms at the North Wing are hard to come by, so only our patrons at the Elrond's Honorarium and Kierdan's contribution tiers are eligible. But if you'd like to be one of the next patrons to join us, be sure to check out patreon.com/prancingponypod.
Please do. We'd love to have you.
Oh, yeah.
There's a short waiting list for the North Wing right now, but we'll get through all those names before we know it, and we're happy to do this segment more frequently if we have to.
As often as we have to. Well, then, why don't we go ahead and welcome our guest to the North Wing tonight, Tom Hillman.
Hi, Alan. Hey, Sean. How you doing tonight?
We're doing great.
Doing
Glad to
great,
have you
Tom.
here.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I feel like we already know you so well.
Yeah.
and I think it's fitting, actually, that we're catching up to do the North Wing here in person at Mythmoot.
At Mythmoot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But for all listeners who
Mhm.
haven't had the pleasure of your company, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what do you do, and what does your family think of your love for Tolkien?
Okay. Well, I'm from New York, originally from New York City. I live on Long Island now. I'm a manager at a bookstore. My family probably thought my interest in Tolkien was maybe a little bit weird, but they never really gave me that hard a time about it. I mean, I did have a brother once who said he didn't want to, he couldn't read Tolkien because it was too realistic. So, but
Okay.
that was about the only feedback I ever got from my family.
That's a unique one.
That's good.
All right. And now the question we ask everybody who comes to the Prancing Pony. When and how did you first discover Tolkien, and what was your experience? Why do you keep coming back?
Well, I was probably, when I was a little kid, if it was mythology, if it was ancient history, Greeks, Romans, King Arthur, Egyptians, any of that stuff, I loved it. I was into it. I would take any book out of the library that had like, a knight or something like that on the cover.
Yeah.
Around 10 years old or so, I discovered Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah.
And I read those books, which were out in like cheap paperbacks at the time.
Yeah.
Started reading the Conan the Barbarian comic book.
Okay.
In those days, comic books had letters to the editor in them.
Right.
Yeah.
You may have heard of the famous George R.R. Martin letter to the editor to the Fantastic Four that Stan Lee responded to.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I have heard that story.
Well, Stan didn't respond to me. I didn't write one. But someone in one of these letters said that battle scene in whatever issue of Conan the Barbarian was the best thing I'd seen since the Siege of Gondor in The Lord of the Rings. And I said, the what?
Yeah, the
in
what?
where?
I need to know about this.
I need to know about this. And so I went looking for the book. I found it on like a spinner rack, a mass market spinner rack at a store. I bought the first one. I went home. I tore through it. I bought the second one. I went home. I got to Frodo was alive, but taken by the enemy. Jumped on my bike, went back to the store, and got the third volume. And then as soon as I finished, I started reading it again.
Yeah.
And I loved it from the beginning.
Yeah.
It was just great stuff.
That's amazing.
So did you jump straight into Lord of the Rings?
I jumped straight into the Lord of the Rings.
No
Hobbit. I didn't read the Hobbit till later, and at first I was kind of disappointed with the Hobbit because I was expecting the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, you're expecting the high epic of Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that was basically it. I read it. In my teenage years, I probably read it 2 or 3 times a year.
Okay. And what about that keeps bringing you back? I mean, you keep reading it, so what is it about it that does?
It's an interesting question. The characters, the story, the questions. I think because it all boils in the end. A lot of it boils down to life and character and morality and good versus evil. And we live in a world where those things are relevant.
That's true.
And so the book seemed to have a certain applicability even before I knew the word applicability.
Yeah. The idea that it's some strange old-fashioned thing that's not relevant to today.
Mm-hmm.
That some people seem to have that idea.
They do. I think that fantasy in general is not applicable. And we read about this in On Fairy Stories. Tolkien talks about these critics that don't understand what escape really ought to be understood as.
Right.
And they seem to think of it as evading your duty, as becoming a fugitive as opposed to escaping.
It's the escape of the prisoner of
Right.
war.
Right.
It's not the escape of the criminal.
Right. Exactly.
And so yes, the prisoner of war is escaping so he can return to reality.
Right.
Exactly.
And he's doing his duty. He's not escaping.
Yeah, that's right. Escaping is the duty. That's a good point.
Very cool. Well, do you have a favorite book in the Legendarium? And if so, why? I should say which one and why.
That's a hard question because part of me wants to just say the Lord of the Rings.
Like the entire,
But part of me wants to say Silmarillion.
Yeah.
I imagine it would be either one of them, but they're both so different.
Yeah, they are.
But I love them both. A real big favorite of mine lately has been The Lay of Ao Shu and Itrun. It's just fabulous. I just love it. I'm so glad it got actually published.
Yeah.
In a form that we could access.
I do wish we'd had a little more chance to talk to Dr. Flieger about that. I know we had so many questions to ask her that
I think we ended up talking a little bit more about
about her more recent book, and that's fair.
And a little bit about Kullervo. But,
we didn't get too much.
We didn't get into too much detail.
Just about how it was a little bit dark.
Yeah.
And it was.
And Ao True and Itrun is the same way, but it's a really cool work.
It really is.
I really liked it a lot.
Pretty amazing.
So that answers my other question, which was favorite non-Legendarium work.
There you go. Ao True and Itrun. Well, now, you've been to how many Myth Moots?
This is my third.
Oh, my. All right. So what's your favorite thing about the Myth Moot experience, and what is it that keeps you coming back to this?
The great thing about going to something like a Myth Moot, and, I've never been to any other convention but a Myth Moot, except the very first Star Trek convention, which I went to when I was a kid.
Very first?
The very first.
Wow.
Exactly.
That's a story.
Yeah, I was like 12, and my mother was a real trooper and took me and some of my friends.
That's amazing.
Cool.
It was wonderful. My mother was really cool about things like that.
Yeah.
But the great thing about going to a place like Myth Moot is, over and above all the interesting papers you get to hear, is that you're with a bunch of people that you don't have to explain things.
Yes. Yeah.
That you don't have to you don't tell a joke or make it just toss off a remark, and people don't, and they don't have to then explain it or have people look at you like you're nuts. Yeah. It's just like people get your jokes.
Yeah, they do.
You speak a common language.
Exactly. You speak a common language, and that's a really nice thing to have.
It's a rare thing, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. It is.
I think like we've talked about and we've heard several times, this is your tribe.
Yeah.
You've really found your people when you're here. And a lot of it is exactly that sort of that commonality of experience and preference.
You could just be sitting around a table with a bunch of people and talking about the history of Middle Earth that everybody knows what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
So
pretty amazing. And now it's your turn.
Is it lightning round
time?
Yeah. All right. Favorite character in Lord of the Rings?
Favorite character in Lord of the Rings?
Lightning round.
Halbarad.
Okay. Oh wow, that's a good one.
Really?
I like that. Favorite scene or moment?
In the Lord of the Rings?
Yes.
Tough. Paths of the Dead.
Oh, yeah.
I love the Paths of the Dead.
Yeah, it's a good one. Okay.
Rivendell or Lorien?
Rivendell.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
There's a library.
Yeah, exactly right.
Exactly. And here's a speculative lightning round question. What happened to the Entwives?
That's a good one. I think they're wandering around somewhere in the north of the Shire.
I hope so.
I think that's what Cousin Hal saw.
Yeah. Entwife.
Favorite author or book other than Tolkien?
Well, before we started, we talked about Patrick O'Brien and his Aubrey Maturin series of sea stories, and they're just absolutely wonderful. And deal with a lot of the same, good and bad character, friendship, love, all the different parts of human life, and humor too.
Yeah.
And I love those books, and I would recommend them to anybody.
Okay, sounds good. Well, those are some great answers. Thank you, Tom. We have really enjoyed having you here in the North Wing. But I think it's time for all of us to head back to the common room and join the rest of the listeners. What do you think?
I think so. Thanks again, Tom.
Thank you.
We hope to have you back for our next Questions After Nightfall.
And now we return you to the podcast already in progress.
Now, of course, our listeners should all know Tom's name already. We've referenced his blog many times on the show. He wrote that spectacular essay on Balrog wings. And he's just been a constant and just very welcome presence, part of our community and a presence on our Facebook page and our Twitter feed.
And, and he gave us that really cool, really amazing introduction back at Myth Moot 5. I don't think the audio of that made it into the feed. I think we trimmed that, but if you catch the video version that was broadcast at the time, you'll actually catch Tom and the last little bit of his introduction, which was far too kind because he compared us. He said we were the Car Talk of Tolkien podcast, which is higher praise than we deserve.
The praise of the praiseworthy, really. There, I mean,
no doubt.
We are truly not worthy, but thank you so much, Tom. And folks, please check out his blog, alasnotme.blogspot.com. If you haven't done so already, we've sent you there several times before on the show. Please check it out if you haven't. But do us a favor and do that after you listen to this podcast, because we're about to dive in, and it's going to be a good one, I think. So why don't we go ahead and get started with the second half of A Shortcut to Mushrooms.
I think that's a great idea, and we'll start the very first passage of the second half of the chapter. I'll go ahead and read. They went along the lane until they saw the thatched roofs of a large house and farm buildings peeping out among the trees ahead. The maggots and the puttyfoots of stock, and most of the inhabitants of the Marish, were house dwellers, and this farm was stoutly built of brick and had a high wall all round it. There was a wide wooden gate opening out of the wall into the lane. Suddenly, as they drew nearer, a terrific baying and barking broke out, and a loud voice was heard shouting, "Grip, Fang, Wolf, come on, lads."
Yeah.
And I'll just end it there for now.
Good place to stop.
I do like the way the farm is described. Stoutly built of brick.
Yeah.
So you know what I'm thinking, right?
I think I do, but what?
She's a brick. Ouch.
No, that was not what I was thinking.
No,
it
wasn't? Now you are.
No.
Yeah, stoutly built of brick. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Little Commodores for you right
just
there.
Just letting it all hang out.
There you go.
Yeah.
Sorry. Once again, that's actually before my time. I just want to make that clear.
Sure.
Anyway.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. House inhabitants, house dwellers. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's just a little reminder that we're in a different part of the Shire, and that And it even says that the inhabitants of the Marish specifically were house dwellers. You know, in a previous version of this chapter, and this is one of the bits you get out of Return of the Shadow. There's a lot of stuff here about holes and houses and towers, and so the character of Odo, who was more or less replaced by Sam, though I'm really oversimplifying that.
True.
He actually asks, "Does Maggot live in a hole or a house?" And there's a lot of information there about just sort of like the history of, you know, hobbits living in holes versus houses, and it's a lot of stuff that ended up being moved to the prologue.
That's right.
But there's a bit more there, isn't there? I mean, in that early version of that chapter.
Oh yeah, there's a lot more. We'll see later when they all do get in there and talk to Farmer Maggot. One of the things that happened in the original version is that Bingo, of course, the early version of Frodo, he ends up disappearing by using the ring. He doesn't want to be seen. And Odo and Frodo, which I know Frodo, no, he's Pippin in the old version. I mean, it's all the names get mixed around, but
not at all confusing.
They go in and talk to Maggot by themselves with Bingo sitting outside, invisible. It's kind of silly stuff, really.
Yeah, it really is. And then Bingo even comes in invisible and picks up the glass of ale, does this really silly stunt.
Right in front of Farmer Maggot, yeah.
Right in front of Farmer Maggot, takes his glass of ale from him and drinks it while he's invisible. It's, as you said, just a lot of silly stuff. It's a lot lighter. It's like, it kind of reminds me of some of the stuff like the introduction of the dwarves to Beorn in The Hobbit.
Yeah.
You know,
just kind of sort of general silliness.
Yeah, just lightness and silliness. Frivolity, I guess, is a good word for it.
Good word.
But then what kind of bugs me about it is that then after all this, the hobbits basically just leave and then they continue the journey to the ferry on foot. It's like, there wasn't really a whole lot of point to it.
There was no purpose. No, you're right. Not in that,
Bingo doesn't come across as very likable to me when he's, you know, kind of grabbing the beer glass and things like that. It's
comes off as kind of pulling off a not very nice prank.
Yeah, exactly. I'm much happier with where Tolkien landed on it.
But the whole thing, I want to come back to that a little bit because, you know, one of the things that Sam in that early version of the story, or Odo, and you're right, by calling him that, it does kind of oversimplify, but it's the character who became Sam. One of the reasons he's asking about whether he lives in a hole or in a house is because he's trying to figure out what sort of landscape features to look for. Because if he was living in a hole, they'd have to look for a hillside or a bank, someplace where a hole could be, you know, dug out. And people could live in it, as opposed to the flat ground where a house would have to be built. And that's really actually why they are. And
that's what we see is that's why they live. Right, exactly. That's why they're house dwellers, is because
the land is flat. There's a lot of marshes and things like that, a lot of bogs, and so the ground isn't going to support the kind of more traditional hole dwelling that you would find in Hobbiton, for example. So yeah, this is very interesting stuff.
In fact, you mentioned marshes. We didn't talk about this last time. We probably should have at least mentioned it. The word marish, which this whole area is called, actually is just an archaic word for a marsh. So that should tell you right there what kind of ground you're dealing with. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is certainly one of the reasons why. And of course, farms, even in the areas where where hobbits dwelt in holes, farms were often built as, you know, traditional exterior structures.
True. Yeah.
So not a surprise, but maybe they weren't a brick house. Sorry, I had to go there again. I won't do that again. I promise. That's the last time. I wanted to talk a little bit about some word nerdery that I came up with. I know you're the word nerd master and I am but the apprentice. But on Grip, Fang,
you are learning though. You are learning quickly.
I am learning.
I am proud of your progress, young Padawan.
One day I shall be the master. So this comes to you from Tolkien's nomenclature. This is actually, I mentioned Grip, Fang, and Wolf, but Wolf has nothing to do with it. It's just Grip and Fang. Tolkien says that Fang's name is meant, of course, to be the English fang, canine or prominent tooth. But he also says it's, quote, associated with grip, the sense of the now lost verb fang. Well, what lost verb fang, you might ask? Well, we asked. It turns out that fang didn't mean canine tooth until the 1550s, and the word skipped Middle English altogether. In fact, back in Old English, fang meant spoils, plunder, booty, a seizing or taking, and it found its origins in the German word gefangen, which is the past participle of a word meaning seize, take, or capture. So interestingly, Tolkien used a word, fang, that to modern ears just means a canine tooth, but it also happens to be an Old English word that is synonymous with the other name of the dog, Grip.
Grip.
To seize, take, or capture.
That's such a cool thing. Yeah, I'm so glad you pulled that out because I read that and I thought that was neat.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
I think it was Hammond and Skull that kind of pointed me in that direction.
Sometimes the obvious etymology is not as obvious as you think it is.
Yeah, exactly. As for wolf, that's a little more on the nose. That's more obvious. I don't think we can go to the etymology there, but love that.
I think so.
You've got some etymology, though, now, don't you?
Yeah, while we're talking word nerdery, here's one that I probably would have turned this one into a philology fair segment if there had been more to say about it. But that's the name maggot.
Yeah.
Obviously, for English speakers who are familiar with a maggot being the word for the larva of a fly, and who isn't familiar with that, at least hopefully from movies and hopefully not from real life experience. If you know what a maggot is in English, the use of it as the name of a hobbit mushroom farmer is a little strange.
Yeah, a little bit. It certainly leads to funny misunderstandings, like the Dutch fans inviting Tolkien to a dinner where they served him maggot soup, which was just mushroom soup.
But I'm sure that does nothing to ease your dislike of mushrooms.
No, 6 of one, half dozen of the other, really.
Yeah. But anyway, the original word for the gross little fly larva was actually maddock, M-A-D-D-O-C-K. Now, it's possible that it ended up getting changed into maggot through metathesis, which is a fancy linguistic term for when two sounds in a word change places. The D and the K in this place switching places, the K becoming a voiced G, and then the D becoming an unvoiced T.
Right.
However, in nomenclature of the Lord of the Rings, Tolkien says that the farmer's name is intended to be a meaningless name, hobbit-like in sound, and that the fact that it happens to be the same as a word for a grub or larva is an accident. Tolkien actually recommends to translators, remember that was the intended audience of the nomenclature, it's just notes for translators. He actually recommends that translators approaching his work just leave it alone. Don't translate it into whatever the word for maggots is in your language.
Oh, goodness, no.
And just kind of leave it. Although I have to say, despite the professor's words on this, I can't help noticing that even though he denies any connection to larvae with this, he also mentions grubs. And grub is another hobbit name.
Yes, it is.
So
Chubs, grubs, and brace girdles, I think is the phrase.
So, I don't know.
Though that was, I wondered if that was more, because that had 2 B's, didn't it? So that was more like grub, like, money grubbing to grab. Grub is.
Well, yeah,
like
but the verb to grub is still spelled with 1 B in our language.
That's true. That is true.
I think the 2 B's is just a sort of an archaism.
2 B's or not 2 B's?
I walked right into that one, didn't I?
You sure did. I love the idea of Tolkien telling translators to leave this alone. I'm imagining somebody in another language trying to just translate this into, farmer fly larva. I mean, it's just nasty.
Well, and I think there was even a note in Hammond and Skull that said that some did and, ended up with some pretty disgusting results. But...
Oh, that's brilliant. I wonder... how fan art developed in those countries. Like, how do they draw Farmer Maggot?
Yeah, I know. Probably looks a bit like Jeff Goldblum.
Oh, well said. Wow. That's good stuff. On that charming note, let's move on.
Only because of his role in The Fly, folks. I'm not saying Jeff Goldblum looks like a maggot.
Yeah, I knew that. I'm assuming, hopefully, that our audience knows that.
Making sure somebody out there is like, hey... Anyway.
What do you got against Jeff Goldblum? What did he do to you?
Exactly.
Seriously, folks, if you ever really don't get one of our pop culture references, feel free to ask us. We've actually had people ask. And if you can also just try Google. I've done that. I used to, I think I've told you before that when I would watch Top Gear, the UK auto show, they would have references to things that I didn't get, and I would Google them, and sometimes much to my chagrin. But oftentimes it was at least clarifying. But yeah, like look it up. Look up, what does Jeff Goldblum have to do with flies? Oh, right. He was in the movie The Fly. There you go. Yes. Done. So anyway.
Although if you do an image search for that, you will see some pretty disturbing stuff.
I didn't say do an image search, man.
Yeah, warning on that.
Yeah, don't do that over breakfast for sure. Farmer Maggot's unwelcome welcome. We're not going to read that, but his initial appearance is basically, who are you? What do you want? I mean, he's not a very happy guy. He's pretty much not very hobbity.
Just short of get off my lawn.
Yeah, pretty much. I think if he was just a couple years older, he'd be, clicking the shotgun and saying, get off my lawn. But
We understand later, though. I mean,
he has had a rough day.
Yeah.
He has had a rough day, and you're going to tell us a little bit about it. I'm going to have you read from when he recognizes Pippin.
All right. Well, if it isn't Master Pippin, Mr. Peregrine Took, I should say, he cried, changing from a scowl to a grin. It's a long time since I saw you round here. It's lucky for you that I know you. I was just going out to set my dogs on any strangers. There are some funny things going on today. Of course, we do get queer folk wandering in these parts at times. Too near the river, he said, shaking his head. But this fellow was the most outlandish I've ever set eyes on. He won't cross my land without leave a second time, not if I can stop it. What fellow do you mean? Asked Pippin. Then you haven't seen him? Said the farmer. He went up the lane towards the causeway not a long while back. He was a funny customer and asking funny questions. But perhaps we'll come along inside and we'll pass the news more comfortable. I'll have a drop of good ale on tap if you and your friends are willing, Mr. Took. It seemed plain that the farmer would tell them more, if allowed to do it in his own time and fashion. So they all accepted the invitation.
Which is wise. I love that.
Absolutely.
That he would, if allowed to do it in his own inimitable
Right.
style.
He's going to take his time with it, yeah.
His own particular idiom.
Idiom, sir.
It's clear that the funny things have set him on edge, and that's why his welcome was a little unwelcome.
Yeah.
And the dogs release Sam and Frodo, which, well, that's convenient. I mean, that's
nice.
Not in your reading, but after, before we get to the next thing, he basically tells them to heal and come on back. And Pippin introduces Frodo.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, Maggot has a response. It's not what Frodo thinks it is.
No, Frodo's pretty nervous. Frodo thinks that as soon as he hears the word Baggins, he's going to think mushroom thief. But
yeah,
no, that's not. That doesn't seem to be what he thinks.
Thief, Baggins, we ate it forever. They stole it from us, precious. They stole the mushrooms.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, no. Thankfully, no. So they do go inside. I'm going to go ahead and pick up there in Maggot's kitchen. They went into the farmer's kitchen and sat by the wide fireplace. Mrs. Maggot brought out beer in a huge jug and filled 4 large mugs. It was a good brew, and Pippin found himself more than compensated for missing the golden perch. Sam sipped his beer suspiciously. He had a natural mistrust of the inhabitants of other parts of the Shire, and also he was not disposed to be quick friends with anyone who had beaten his master, however long ago. After a few remarks about the weather and the agricultural prospects, which were no worse than usual, Farmer Maggot put down his mug and looked at them all in turn. "Now, Mr. Peregrine," he said, "where might you be coming from, and where might you be going to? Were you coming to visit me? For if so, you'd gone past my gate without my seeing you."
There you
I'm
go.
going to leave it there because I always like leaving things, hanging right in midair with a good question. I want to touch on Sam's mistrust real quick. I have to think that this is absolutely perfectly reasonable. I mean, Maggot may be a good guy, as we find out, but he beat a teenage hobbit for taking fungus.
Yeah, but come on. I mean, fungus, that's a major cash crop in this region. I mean, this is
true.
This is his
living,
This is his livelihood, yeah. I mean,
that's a fair thing. That's a fair thing, I suppose.
I'm not saying beating a teenage hobbit is ever the right solution to anything, but I can understand him having a reaction, I guess I'll say.
If beating teenage hobbits is the answer, what was the question?
Oh, man.
Oh, goodness.
I'll take things that are illegal for 300, Alex. But no, I mean, you're right about Sam's mistrust, and I think it's important to note that there's that this is this kind of mistrust and this I don't know. Sam and Maggot kind of avoid speaking to each other in general.
They do, don't they? Yeah, Sam doesn't.
My favorite part comes later, and I won't spoil it. We'll get to it in a little bit, but you just see a little bit of that kind of mistrust of outsiders. Sam sees Maggot as other, and
he does, absolutely.
This is something that characterizes this whole scene.
In fairness, Maggot sees Sam as other too.
Exactly. Yeah, it goes both ways.
This is There's a mutual mistrust, and you're right. I mean that suspicion comes from 2 things. One is the natural but not appropriate mistrust of other inhabitants of the Shire. But the second half, of course, is the unreasonable response of beating somebody for
stealing mushrooms.
Oh my goodness. There is no more fungus among us. Who took it?
Oh.
Anyway, sorry. You knew that might get there.
Yeah. But beer. Large mugs of beer.
Mugs of beer.
They certainly have a way of healing all wounds, don't they?
Yeah. And Sam may have sipped his beer suspiciously, but I just want to point out he did sip it.
He was sipping it. Yes, he was. Yep.
Yeah. Sam may be suspicious, but he's not stupid.
He's not turning his nose up at the beer.
No, he's not. No. Though he might have, sniffed it carefully before he drank it.
Does this taste bitter to anybody but me?
Right, exactly.
It should taste bitter. It's ale.
It's ale, that's right. Oh, my goodness. And Maggot's going to go ahead and he asked this question, were you coming to visit me? What were you doing here? How did you get here?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have you pick up shortly after that. I think this is a really key little section here in terms of his response. I mean, Pippin tries to give him a quick explanation. Basically, we did get into the lane from the other end. We came over your fields.
Yeah.
We're trying to get, over to the ferry.
Yeah. We weren't trying to trespass. We just sort of ended up on your land. Yeah.
Right. We ended up on your land, but we did get into the lane. We tried to avoid actually trespassing. And what's Farmer Maggot's response here?
All right. But I wasn't worrying about that. You have leave to walk over my land if you have a mind, Mr. Peregrine. And you, Mr. Baggins, though I dare say you still like mushrooms. He laughed. Ah, yes, I recognize the name. I recollect the time when young Frodo Baggins was one of the worst young rascals of Buckland. But it wasn't mushrooms I was thinking of. I had just heard the name Baggins before you turned up. What do you think that funny customer asked me? They waited anxiously for him to go on. Well, the farmer continued, approaching his point with slow relish, he came riding on a big black horse in at the gate, which happened to be open, and right up to my door. All black he was himself, too, and cloaked and hooded up, as if he did not want to be known. Now what in the Shire can he want? I thought to myself. We don't see many of the big folk over the border, and anyway I had never heard of any like this black fellow.
Very good. I have to say, I mean, we're reading this. We're not turning it into radio drama. But if this is radio drama, I think we'd probably hear him doing lines like this. I just heard the name Baggins before you turned up. What do you think that funny customer asked me?
Really, really slow.
Really slow, right? Well, he came riding on a big black horse.
You're getting into William Shatner with it.
Like way too slow, like really drawn out melodramatic.
Yeah.
Doing it as Shatner's even more fun, on a big black horse in at the gate, which happened to be open, and right up to my door. All black he was himself, too, and cloaked, hooded up, Spock.
I do love your Shatner. Yes.
I mean, this is a farmer who loves to tell tales and who almost never has an audience.
Yeah, and we see how like the hobbits in the first couple of chapters, how they just love to gossip. They love to tell these stories, and this you see Maggot's just in his element. He's just
You're right. In his element. That's a good way of putting it.
Slow relish, he just.
And there's never any rush either. I mean, the hobbits are always. I don't just mean these hobbits, but hobbits in general, it seems, are always willing to take their time to tell the story.
Yeah.
And here, and it's an interesting juxtaposition, because as the readers, we're desperate to know the story. We want to understand.
Right.
What do you mean there was a black rider here? What do we want?
We're trying to get to more information as soon as we can. We want those secrets to be revealed. Yeah.
But this farmer is going to do it in his time and in his way. I love that.
Yep.
So we're actually not going to read most of the conversation between the Black Rider and Farmer Maggot, maybe because it's too hard to read. I don't know. I mean, did you want to do both Farmer Maggot's gravelly voice that's making you choke and the Nazgul voice? I don't know.
No. No, I don't think I do. Plus, I personally actually read a lot of this back in Tolkien Reading Day. Yeah.
Yeah, I remembered that. And I was like, you know what? He's read that enough. I don't need to make him read any more of that.
And I used a sort of unorthodox Nazgul voice, which is...
You did. I remember that.
I don't know. It's always the way I hear these lines, and it'll be interesting to see Nazgul lines as we go on, if I still think of them that way. But
I do think that here they were trying to act as normal as possible. We just read... for the last episode, we talked about how the Witch King knew that they needed to use stealth and a minimum of terror.
If ever they're going to sound more human, it would be here, because they're trying really hard to.
Yeah. And I think the only clue that we're given that they don't sound normal is at the very first part when he says, "I come from yonder," he said, "slow and stiff-like."
Mm-hmm.
In other words, he didn't sound like some creepy alien from another world. He sounded normal, just he sounded slow
and stiff. Yeah. Like he's trying really hard to sound as normal as he can.
Exactly. And, it turns out that we know who this particular Black Rider is, by the way.
That's right.
We find out that this is Khamûl, the Easterling, the only one of the Nazgul ever given a name by Tolkien.
That's right.
You might remember that really long sidebar last week. Really long. We dug pretty deep into the hunt for the ring for that sidebar, but we left a few nuggets for this week. In that tale, we learned that the chieftain of the Ringwraiths, now that's the Witch King, dwelt in Minas Morgul with 6 companions, while the second to the chief, Khamûl, the Shadow of the East, abode in Dol Guldur as Sauron's lieutenant, with one other as his messenger.
That's right. And we learn a number of other things from that tale, too, and some of which we touched on last week. Mm-hmm. Some of the Nazgul were actually searching the Shire while the Lord of Morgul and 2 of his companions were camped between the Barrow Downs and the South Downs. Well, one of the searchers in the Shire was Khamûl, and it was he that was assigned the task of finding Hobbiton.
Well, not surprisingly then, in Note 1, Christopher Tolkien tells us this. From notes recounting in detail the movements of the Black Riders in the Shire, it emerges that it was Khamûl who came to Hobbiton and spoke to Gaffer Gamgee, who followed the hobbits along the road to Stock, and who narrowly missed them at the Bucklebury Ferry. The rider who accompanied him, whom he summoned by cries on the ridge above Woodhall, and with whom he visited Farmer Maggot, was his companion from Dol Guldur. Of Khamûl, it is said here that he was the most ready of all the Nazgul, after the Black Captain himself, to perceive the presence of the ring, but also the one whose power was most confused and diminished by daylight.
There you go.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Really interesting. But yeah.
It is. It's very interesting to see a bit of the character of one of the Ringwraiths.
Yeah.
Just within the text of Lord of the Rings, they're not distinct from one another at all, except for the Witch King.
No, they're almost like the dwarves in The Hobbit.
That's true. That is very true.
Said one of the dwarves.
Right. And you never know which one, except for there's a couple of them.
Except for Thorin and
Balin and maybe Dory, a few of them. Bombur, a few of them kind of have their own personalities, but most of them do not.
That's correct.
Yeah. That's the Ringwraiths. And it is really cool that you get the stuff about Khamûl. And
do you ever see the dwarves and the Ringwraiths at the same time?
No, you
Just
don't.
saying. It's a conspiracy theory, I know.
You are absolutely right. The dwarf. Yeah, no.
They're dwarves on invisible stilts. That's all I'm saying.
They put on their glasses, and they're the dwarves, and then they take off their glasses, and they're the Ringwraiths.
There you go.
They don't need a phone booth or anything to change into.
Oh my.
Anyway,
sorry. Things I shouldn't have said for 500, Alex.
You can always cut it if you want to.
No, I'm going to leave that there. It's too good.
All right. What else do we have in this section that we didn't read? Well, there is this really, really cool bit about Maggot talking about how he felt the shiver down his back.
Oh, yeah.
While talking to Khamûl. And again, we get that weapon of fear. The Nazgul's primary weapon is fear.
Absolutely. And not surprise or ruthless efficiency. Sorry. That was so much fun. Anyway.
Almost fanatical devotion to the ring.
Even better. That's well done.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and pick up shortly after that. Actually, at the very end of the replay of the conversation that Maggot gives us here. He says, "He gave a sort of hiss. It might have been laughing, and it might not. Then he spurred his great horse right at me, and I jumped out of the way only just in time. I called the dogs, but he swung off and rode through the gate and up the lane towards the causeway like a bolt of thunder. What do you think of that? Frodo sat for a moment, looking at the fire, but his only thought was, how on earth would they reach the ferry? I don't know what to think, he said at last. Then I'll tell you what to think, said Maggot. You should never have gone mixing yourself up with hobbiton folk, Mr. Frodo. Folk are queer up there. Sam stirred in his chair and looked at the farmer with an unfriendly eye. But you were always a reckless lad. When I heard you had left the Brandybucks and gone off to that old Mr. Bilbo, I said that you were going to find trouble. Mark my words, this all comes of those strange doings of Mr. Bilbo's. His money was got in some strange fashion in foreign parts, they say. Maybe there's some that want to know what has become of the gold and jewels that he buried in the hill of Hobbiton, as I hear. Frodo said nothing. The shrewd guesses of the farmer were rather disconcerting. Yes, they were.
Yes, they were indeed. And I love this word shrewd.
Yes.
Maggot is not, he may be, very rural, provincial, but he is not some dull-witted, farmer. I mean, if you fast forward a bit to the next chapter, Mary actually has some cool stuff to say about him. He says, Old Maggot is a shrewd fellow. A lot goes on behind his round face that does not come out in his talk. I've heard that he used to go into the old forest at one time, and he has the reputation of knowing a good many strange things.
That's interesting. Because I was thinking that if you fast forward a bit more to the time that the hobbits have with Tom Bombadil, Tom tells them that he owed his recent knowledge largely to Farmer Maggot, whom he seemed to regard as a person of more importance than they had imagined.
Right.
And then Tom specifically says, there's earth under his old feet and clay on his fingers, wisdom in his bones, and both his eyes are open.
That's right.
That's high praise.
That is very high praise from Tom Bombadil.
I know, Tom Bombadil, of all the eldest of all.
Yeah.
Quite possibly an Ainu.
Yeah.
Quite possibly. We're not discussing that until we get there, so you know.
It'll be here before we know it, folks.
Keep all Tom Bombadil questions to yourselves until the appropriate time. No.
Oh, we've already got a mailbag full of them.
We do. We have a bag full of them. But feel free to throw one in there. We might be able to pull parts of it in. But anyway.
Yeah, why not?
Shrewd. Shrewd's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's Maggot. Don't underestimate him.
No, don't sleep on this guy. Right. I just wanted to look up shrewd. I wanted to kind of review what that means for people. I think everybody has a good context, but it's good to know the dictionary definition. Having or showing sharp powers of judgment. Astute.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we have a little bit of a clearer meaning of that. This is somebody who's really sharp, really knows what's going on, pays attention, and has a combination of wisdom and observation that allows them to be really, really sound in their judgment. Yeah.
And just through that, he manages to come to a conclusion about what this is all about.
And he's not far off, is he?
Very close, yeah.
I mean, there may not be any gold and jewels buried in the hill. That's a rumor that still hasn't died. But boy, it sure does come of those strange doings of Mr. Bilbo's, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. But before we get to that conclusion, we get some of that, some of that prejudice, don't we? That outsider treatment.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. This assertion that folk are queer up in Hobbiton, just like they'd say about folk in the East Farthing.
That's right. Those folk in the Marish, they're totally,
Yeah. And you notice Sam notices as soon as he says something, right?
I love that.
Stirred in his chair, looked at the farmer with an unfriendly eye. As we discussed, it goes both ways, this distrust.
It does. Even though we're only, maybe 20 miles apart as the crow flies, maybe a little longer than that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the map in front of me, so it might be 30. But, you get my idea. They're still neighbors. They're still near neighbors.
Right. Yeah, certainly in the grand scheme, they are.
Yes.
They're next-door neighbors,
practically. They're next-door neighbors, yeah.
But yeah, within the scope of their small world, they're they're from very far apart.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we don't read the advice that he gives them, but he basically tells them, stay there in Buckland. Good job, good on you for coming back. Stay there. Don't get mixed up with the weirdos. If any of these people come back, I love this. But we'll just, I'll deal with them. I'll say you're dead or you've left.
Yeah,
I'll deal with them. Like you're going to sick your dogs on them. The dogs that turned and ran. I'm not sure how you're going to do that.
Well, the thought is good.
The thought's there, absolutely.
He's definitely he's going to look out for Frodo. He sees Frodo as one of him,
and that's important because I don't think he would look out for him if he didn't see him as that.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
If they were making this journey and it was Sam who was in trouble, I think we'd have a totally different
for sure.
picture.
Yeah,
absolutely.
If it was Bilbo who was in trouble,
Oh yeah, you're right.
He wouldn't do that for him.
No.
And it is interesting that he points out that, like as not, it's old Mr. Bilbo they want news of.
That's an interesting thought.
Often stop to think about this from the perspective of the Black Riders. I mean, they technically are looking for Bilbo, not Frodo.
Yeah, they have no idea about Frodo, and that is exactly who they're looking for.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't matter because ultimately they want the Hobbit who has the ring, and that is Frodo.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting that from their perspective, they're thinking of Bilbo through all this because they have no reason to assume that anybody gave the ring that they got from
give the ring up,
or would give the ring.
That's an alien concept. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Who would give up a ring?
They wouldn't have given up their rings. No.
Right. Absolutely. So it's not like it means anything, but it's an interesting sort of perspective to think about.
It is. It is indeed. Well, speaking of another perspective, I'm going to have you read the next passage for us.
All right. So yeah, after he talks about the fact that it's probably Bilbo that they're looking for.
Right.
Frodo agrees, and then Maggot kind of sees that Frodo's not really wanting to go any further with this. So I'll pick up right there. It is as plain as my nose that no accident brought you and that rider here on the same afternoon, and maybe my news was no great news to you after all. I'm not asking you to tell me anything you have a mind to keep to yourself, but I see you're in some kind of trouble. Perhaps you're thinking it won't be too easy to get to the ferry without being caught. I was thinking so, said Frodo. But we have got to try and get there, and it won't be done by sitting and thinking. So I am afraid we must be going. Thank you very much indeed for your kindness. I've been in terror of you and your dogs for over 30 years, Farmer Maggot, though you may laugh to hear it. It's a pity, for I've missed a good friend, and now I'm sorry to leave so soon. But I'll come back, perhaps, one day, if I get a chance. You'll be welcome when you come, said Maggot. But now I've a notion. It's near sundown already, and we're going to have our supper, for we mostly go to bed soon after the sun. If you and Mr. Peregrine and all could stay and have a bite with us, we would be pleased.
Can I just point out, if you and Mr. Peregrine and all.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite moment in this, when he's like, he doesn't even recognize Sam.
The only other Hobbit in the room.
Right. He's and all.
And all. He's not even in that guy or in you.
Just and all.
Just and all.
And others who may or may not be present. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the one I was thinking of earlier when I said, like, I've got a favorite moment in this about Maggot and Sam not really recognizing each other's existence.
Not even observing, including but not limited to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is, that's terrible.
It's great. It is terrible, but it's hilarious.
If you and Mr. Peregrine and all, I mean, you can almost see him kind of like, and all, could stay and have a fight with us. I mean, he's just dismissing him completely.
Yeah, I know, totally.
So well done. It's so subtle. I think that is one of those, another blink and you miss it moment. But I love Frodo's apology, by the way, his response and belated apology, right? I mean, this is 30 years later, and he's basically saying, I'm sorry to leave so soon. I've been in terror. I regret that. It's really interesting. I enjoy seeing that.
It's nice, and it's one of those, I don't know, I see it as more Frodo's kind of somber wisdom. He realizes he's missed a good friend, and now, although he doesn't say it, he knows he's leaving the Shire for good, and it's too late.
Yeah. I mean, you can even hear kind of his thought process when he says, I'll come back perhaps one day. I think he realizes full well that's not likely. This is a polite nothing in some ways.
Right.
But he certainly admires Farmer Maggot and wishes that things had been different.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good way of saying
the
it.
Invitation to dinner. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up actually right after the section you finished as they begin dinner. And so should we, said Frodo. But we must be going at once, I'm afraid. Even now it will be dark before we can reach the ferry. Ah, but wait a minute. I was going to say after a bit of supper I'll get out a small wagon, and I'll drive you all to the ferry. That will save you a good step, and it might also save you trouble of another sort. Frodo now accepted the invitation gratefully, to the relief of Pippin and Sam. The sun was already behind the western hills, and the light was failing. 2 of Maggot's sons and his 3 daughters came in, and a generous supper was laid on the large table. The kitchen was lit with candles, and the fire was mended. Mrs. Maggot bustled in and out. 1 or 2 other hobbits belonging to the farm household came in. In a short while, 14 sat down to eat. There was beer in plenty, and a mighty dish of mushrooms and bacon, besides much other solid farmhouse fare. The dogs lay by the fire and gnawed rinds and cracked bones.
What a family.
I know I'd rather be eating the bacon and mushrooms even than the gnawed rinds and cracked bones. Just saying.
I mean, I won't turn my nose up at a few cracked bones.
Well, if they're baby back ribs, and,
right? Yeah, no kidding. That's the truth right there.
Yeah, I love this scene. I really love this scene. It's
great. Yeah,
I can picture it in my head. The hustle and bustle. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it's been this way for you. If you go to like a family gathering at Thanksgiving and there's 20 people at the table, 14 people in this case. There's a lot of movement, there's people bringing in the trays and bringing in the plates.
Everybody's in movement at the same time. Everybody's kind of helping set up the table.
Exactly.
And
yeah. It's a wonderful scene. And there's so many people here. And I love that there's this kind of egalitarian, the members of the farm household came in. So, they're workers that live there and are a part of they're an unofficial part of the family. They certainly join the family for dinner.
Right. Yeah.
And, we're reminded a little bit towards the end of the passage that you read that they go to bed soon after the sun. And of course, that's because they get up soon after the sun.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. They're farmers.
They are farmers. That's their life.
And they need that daylight. Yep.
Absolutely. So this is a wonderful, wonderful moment. There's a lot of warmth here, not just physical warmth, but you can just sense the spirit of camaraderie between all these folks.
Yeah. And once again, I said this earlier with beer and I was half joking, but, here we see food. It just has a way of, smoothing over all that awkwardness. Once it's supper time, they're all family, even Sam, I'm sure, in his way.
Oh yeah.
He's welcome at the table.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Hearty, solid farmhouse fare. What would people eat in a farmhouse? Because of course I've never lived in one. We know they're having mushrooms and bacon.
Right.
I'd imagine it's looking like it's probably some sort of like root vegetables, potatoes or something like that, turnips or carrots, all in a stew. I'm seeing a big, hearty,
I can see that.
Sticks to the walls of your stomach, fills you up, solid food.
Real comfort food with simple ingredients.
Very simple ingredients, very pure ingrodients.
Some home baked rustic bread.
Oh yes, definitely.
Really, really nice big loaf of bread.
Hopefully some butter as well. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
You got. Assuming they have, cows. We know they have pigs because they have bacon.
Because they have bacon, right?
Right. They have butter in the Shire, right?
Yeah.
Bilbo thought about that a lot during the Hobbit.
Yeah, I'm sure. Just despite the fact that we think of Maggot as a mushroom farmer, I'm sure he's like a subsistence farmer.
Right.
He probably grows a variety of things, has a variety of livestock. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Certainly enough to make some fresh bacon. So dogs are in the house along with the family and the farm workers. I love that. Great stuff.
And they're not carrying the plates like at Beorn's house.
No, they are not. That would be great.
That would be really funny. But yeah, and we've, by now we've seen and we've talked about several examples of Maggot's hospitality. I just think, I think it's worth pointing out, we spent a good bit of time on this back in Tolkien Reading Day for 2018. That was episode 75. And, we talked about this scene and just hospitality being one of those wonderful hobbit traits, that Maggot exhibits. And it is a really great scene. Like you said, it's really heartwarming, just the sheer generosity and hospitality that Maggot shows to Frodo, whom he last saw stealing his mushrooms.
Yeah.
Pippin, who is an old friend of the family.
Who he last saw after beating him.
And chasing him all the way to the ferry. Or his dogs chase him all the way to the ferry.
His dogs, right.
Pippin obviously is an old friend. Sam is an outsider he doesn't really trust, but they're all hobbits and they come together and it's just really heartwarming. There's this warm fireplace. There's beer on tap. And as a person who has his own beer on tap in his house, I really love that detail about Maggot. He must be a home brewer or his wife is a home brewer. Super
I
cool
love
stuff.
that they engage in small talk, the weather, farm stuff, right? They talked about that earlier. They talked about the agricultural outlooks, which are no worse than any other year.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you'd have conversations about. You know, this is a farmer. You're going to talk about farming things.
Yeah, that's true.
It's just a very genuine, rural, just sort of homey conversation going on.
Yeah. It's very down to earth.
There you go. That's the word I was looking for. Down to earth, very grounded. And really offering our heroes supper in a wagon, man, that's a big deal right now.
Oh, yeah.
They need friends. They need allies. This is that theme that we've talked about, the importance of fellowship. Their little circle temporarily grows from 3 to 14 to include Maggot and his family. I love it.
Yeah. And Maggot, as we kind of talked about, Maggot is highly protective of them. I mean, especially of Pippin and Frodo, because he views them as being of his own kind. As you said, probably Sam, Bilbo, he wouldn't be quite as protective of. But
no.
He even said Pippin was free to walk over his land anytime he wanted to. That strikes me as a pretty big deal.
That is a big deal.
He reminds Frodo that if he stays, he'll have friends in these parts. It's just, again, it's just, that fellowship, we are in fellowship together, and I'll protect you. I'll have your back. And there is still, this is all kind of colored with that little vein of that hobbity mistrust of people from other parts of the Shire.
Yeah, the outsiders,
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Sam and Maggot being suspicious of each other, but of course Sam still drinks the beer. But also the fact that Maggot
still brings him food,
and Maggot still brings him food. But we also, we see that Maggot thinks this all has to do with Frodo mixing himself up with Hobbiton folk. If you just stayed here, not going out to Hobbiton where folk are so queer, none of this would have happened to you. So there is that mistrust that's kind of mixed in with all this hospitality. It's an interesting, it's a complex social structure within the Shire.
Yeah, it is. And, we've talked about this before, how this mistrust, this provinciality, this parochialism, even within the Shire, it's really the luxury that they have of living in such a small world, a protected world where the borders of your entire existence are just the region you live in.
Right.
You couldn't do that if your world was different than that.
If you had a larger outlook, if you're more connected to the world outside. This is something that the 4 hobbits that go on this journey, and we haven't seen much of Merry yet, but the 4 hobbits that go on this journey, they'll come back kind of never seeing the world that way again, because they've just seen
it changes their perspective entirely.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yep. So then they get ready to go. Maggot's wife gives him some great advice, tells him not only to be careful, but to not argue with foreigners and come straight back.
Don't go arguing with any foreigners.
I get advice like that from my wife every once in a while. She's very wise. For me, it's not foreigners. She just says, just don't go arguing with people.
Yeah, my wife usually reminds me, don't go arguing with family. But
oh, yes, Thanksgiving is always and the holidays. And anytime you get 20 people, 14 people at a table like this, you're always going to run the risk of saying the wrong thing. And
going to argue about something. Yep.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
But, do you know something else I've noticed here in this exact same paragraph? She calls him Maggot. Maggot's wife calls him Maggot. But she herself is Mrs. Maggot.
Yeah.
So she's calling her husband by his last name.
By his last name. That would be weird.
Is that a thing? I mean, his name's not Maggot. So
it's not. You're right.
And maybe, does he just have one name? Is it like Prince or Cher?
Maybe.
Maggot?
I mean, it's like Prince or Cher or Sting or Madonna. Yeah.
Right.
Oh man, that's
I don't know. It's just interesting. She's Mrs. Maggot, and then she goes, it's like, if my wife called me, now you be careful out there, Marchese, don't go arguing with your family. It's just, I don't see that happening.
No, that is a little different. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe we could ask some of our friends in the UK if that's something that maybe it's more common over there. Well, people did. We know that Tolkien was often called Tollers by his friends, maybe more of a reference to his surname than to his first name.
Well, that's probably true. And I've been
that.
called Marchese by my friends before, sure.
Yeah.
But, I've been
called
not
Sisto
by my wife.
but not by my wife. You're right.
Right.
That is weird. Yeah.
It's funny.
Is that a thing, people in the UK? Tell us that.
Someone tell us. It's interesting.
Let Barliman know. In the meantime...
Or confirm my secret suspicion that his name might actually be Maggot.
Or that he just has the one name. The farmer formerly known as Maggot.
Yep, and now it's just a symbol. It's just like a stylized mushroom.
Yeah, exactly. His name used to be Gordon Sumner, then he just changed it to Maggot.
Yep.
Anyway, yeah, gotta love those single name people. They're very, very important that way.
Well, Tom Bombadil says Maggot is more important than we think. So.
That's true. That's true. So
anyway,
I'm gonna have you, before this gets much worse, have you read the next little bit.
All right. There was now no breath of wind stirring. The night was still and quiet, and a chill was in the air. They went without lights and took it slowly. After a mile or two, the lane came to an end, crossing a deep dike, and climbing a short slope up onto the high-banked causeway. Maggot got down and took a good look either way, north and south, but nothing could be seen in the darkness, and there was not a sound in the still air. Thin strands of river mist were hanging above the dikes and crawling over the fields. "It's going to be thick," said Maggot, "but I'll not light my lanterns till I turn for home. We'll hear anything on the road long before we meet it tonight."
Wow, I just kind of got chills when you read that thing about the thin strands of river mist hanging above the dikes and crawling over the fields. Is that a visual or what?
Yeah, it is, I know.
Man.
You see the motion of the mist.
You really can.
Mm-hmm. Not really just hanging, but crawling, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I want to point out that we learn in this passage something important that's going to come into play at the next passage that I read, and that it's a mile or two from his house down the lane to the end of the lane where it intersects the causeway. It goes up over, crossing the dike and climbing up a short slope. So just keep that in mind, and then I'm going to go ahead and pick up here and read the next little bit. This is what would be a pretty tense time, as we'll find out.
Yep.
It was 5 miles or more from Maggot's Lane to the ferry. The hobbits wrapped themselves up, but their ears were strained for any sound above the creak of the wheels and the slow clop of the pony's hoofs. Hoofs. Sorry.
You'll never look at that word without overthinking the pronunciation again.
I'll probably never pronounce it right again. It's going to be like Taniquetil.
Mm-hmm.
The wagon seemed slower than a snail to Frodo. Beside him, Pippin was nodding towards sleep, but Sam was staring forwards into the rising fog. They reached the entrance to the fairy lane at last. "Fairy lane is in my ears."
Oh, well done.
Sorry.
We may have to go back to Beatles references for the titles.
There you go. I think so, maybe. I don't know where that stuff comes from, Sean. I really don't. I'm just reading and then all of a sudden, boop, it just pops in.
That's what I love about it.
Oh, man. So it was marked by 2 tall white posts that suddenly loomed up on their right. Farmer Maggot drew in his ponies, and the wagon creaked to a halt. They were just beginning to scramble out, when suddenly they heard what they had all been dreading: hoofs on the road ahead. The sound was coming towards them. Maggot jumped down and stood holding the ponies' heads and peering forward into the gloom. Clip-clop, clip-clop, came the approaching rider. The fall of the hoofs sounded loud in the still, foggy air. "You'd better be hidden, Mr. Frodo," said Sam anxiously. "You get down in the wagon and cover up with blankets, and we'll send this rider to the rightabouts." He climbed out and went to the farmer's side. Black riders would have to ride over him to get near the wagon. Clop, 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 clop. The rider was nearly on them. "Hello there," called Farmer Maggot. The advancing hoofs stopped short. They thought they could dimly guess a dark, cloaked shape in the mist, a yard or two ahead. "Now then," said the farmer, throwing the reins to Sam and striding forward, "don't you come a step nearer. What do you want, and where are you going?" "I want Mr. Baggins. Have you seen him?" said a muffled voice. But the voice was the voice of Mary Brandybuck. A dark lantern was uncovered, and its light fell on the astonished face of the farmer. "Mr. Merry!" he cried. I love that passage.
Man,
so much tension.
Such a tense scene. And
such a tense scene.
I love the way you did the clip, clop, clip, clop. It just, it really just,
well, thank you.
I heard it, and you really just get the sense of this just had to be.
Oh, what a terrifying sound.
Yeah.
In that setting.
Yeah, in that setting. And it was just a kind of a terrifying setting. I mean,
oh, yeah.
And
dark
as
and
we discussed,
foggy.
Yeah. And as we discussed, it was, a 5-mile ride, which had to be absolutely nerve-wracking. I mean, and obviously you see Frodo thinks it seems slower than a snail.
Right.
Sam is really hyper-vigilant. Pippin, of course, is taking a nap.
Pippin.
And as you said a moment ago, it was 1 or 2 miles
right
to the
from
causeway.
the house to the lane.
Right.
Down the lane to the causeway.
Yeah.
So we're looking at a 6 or 7
miles. Yeah.
That's long.
Yeah.
Now, I looked into that a little bit because this happened so quickly in the book. I mean, look at that one paragraph. It was 5 miles or more from the lane. And then the next paragraph, they reached the entrance to the fairy lane at last. That's very quick in the book. But let's be honest. I looked this up. Horses pulling a wagon would walk between 2.5 to 3 miles an hour. Now, that means this was a very long, intense journey. If it's 6 miles, not 7, and the wagon's going at 3 miles an hour, kind of the faster end of the estimates that I was able to find, then the shortest length that this ride is 2 hours. If it's 7 miles at 2.5 miles an hour, it's more like 2 hours, 45 minutes. This is at least a 2 hour, probably closer to 2.5 hour ride in the back of a wagon at night with the fog, knowing that there are black riders looking for you.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm just imagining, putting that in modern terms, and obviously in a motor car, you would go much farther in that time, but just imagine being tense and on edge for a 3-hour drive.
Imagine a dark country road.
Yeah.
A dark country road or a dark desert road where there's no road lights or street lights and it's abandoned. There's no other cars around.
And it's foggy.
But somebody's trying to find
Somebody's following you. Yeah.
And it's foggy and you can't see and you're driving over 100 miles.
Yeah.
It's over, it's a 2 hour plus journey. And at the very end of your journey, just as you get to where you're going, you hear another engine.
Yes. Oh.
It is scary stuff.
It is, yeah.
They have every reason to be freaking out. And I have to say, these guys are courageous. Both of them get out, Maggot first and then Sam, get out and are putting themselves in a position of danger. If this is a black rider, they're in a world of hurt.
Yep. They are ready to protect Frodo.
And how dense is this mist, by the way? They thought they could dimly guess this dark cloak shaped a yard or two ahead. That is not much visibility.
No, it is not.
I mean, I know it's partly the dark, too. Dark plus the mist, but...
Yeah.
Ooh. Oh, by the way, for the sound effects, I almost got out the 2 halves of a coconut.
Well, of course, yeah. Banging them together, yeah.
Yeah, that would have been the best way.
Where'd you get the coconuts?
Are you suggesting coconuts migrate?
Thank you. I was hoping you'd come back.
Of course I did.
Not at all. They could be carried.
What, by the husks?
We should probably leave that one there.
We probably should leave that one there. Now, you notice a couple times I said hooves, or not hooves. I always said hoofs, but I sometimes said hoofs. But that's because I'm still trying to figure out whether it's hoofs or hoofs. But one thing it's not is hooves. Remember how we complained about that? I don't know if it was last episode or maybe a couple ones back.
Yeah.
Where we corrected the professor. We're like,
kind of overcorrected.
You fixed dwarves. Why couldn't you fix hooves? Well, once again, we proved that when we try to correct the professor, we are wrong.
We're like that poor proofreader who tried to change nasturtiums.
To nasturtiums, you're right.
Cowering in the corner under the professor's blistering wit and linguistic knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, see, it turns out, I mean, I guess we're less wrong than that guy, because it turns out that hoofs was in fact the main plural form for hoof. It wasn't until the 1970s, when you and I would have started reading, that the word hooves became more prevalent in writing than the word hoofs. So that explains Tolkien's use of hoofs. Now, both words are acceptable. Both have the same meaning. But out of respect, we will try to stick with the word Tolkien used, no matter how many times we end up mispronouncing it, hoofs or hoofs.
And if we do mispronounce it, let's just consider it a mispronunciation brought about by being accustomed to saying it a different way.
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of.
Exactly. Not a correction. Not a correction is the point.
Not a correction, just a plain mistake.
Just a mistake. We make those. We do
every now all the time.
I don't know about all the time. That might be saying too much.
Well, I don't mean like literally all the time, like literally every second of the podcast is a mistake. That would be very bad indeed.
Just the parts I say.
We just frequently make mistakes. That's all we're trying to say. Okay, we occasionally
regularly
make mistakes.
Yeah, on occasion.
Once in a while, we make a mistake.
I'll go with that. Once in a while.
And our wonderful listeners are always quick to point them out.
Aren't they? And patient to endure them. Yes.
And if anyone would like to correct me right now and say, no, you guys hardly ever make mistakes, I would appreciate that too.
We would welcome that. Absolutely. In the meantime, while people are lining up to tell you that you never make a mistake, I'm going to have you read
I wouldn't say never.
The last passage of the chapter.
All right. So, yeah, I'm going to be picking up here. Mary's just kind of explaining to them how he's been looking for them, was worried that they'd fallen in some ditches, which kind of going back to your country road, analogy. Yeah, I can certainly imagine. Yeah, I can certainly imagine that.
Yeah, no doubt.
So, okay. Where did you find them, Mr. Maggot? In your duck pond? No, I caught 'em trespassing, said the farmer, and nearly set my dogs on 'em. But they'll tell you all the story, I've no doubt. Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Merry and Mr. Frodo and all.
And all. He does it again.
There it is again. At least that time it's Pippin and Sam. But anyway.
Man, that's bad.
Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Merry and Mr. Frodo and all, I'd best be turning for home. Mrs. Maggot will be worritin' with the night getting thick. He backed the wagon into the lane and turned it. Well, good night to you all, he said. It's been a queer day and no mistake, but all's well as ends well, though perhaps we should not say that until we reach our own doors. I'll not deny that I'll be glad now when I do. He lit his lanterns and got up. Suddenly, he produced a large basket from under the seat. I was nearly forgetting, he said. Mrs. Maggot put this up for Mr. Baggins with her compliments. He handed it down and moved off, followed by a chorus of thanks and good nights. They watched the pale rings of light round his lanterns as they dwindled into the foggy night. Suddenly, Frodo laughed. From the covered basket he held, the scent of mushrooms was rising.
Hopefully with bacon. I mean, just saying.
I mean, if bacon was there, he probably would smell the bacon first, though, don't you think?
That's true. That's true. There's a slightly more potent smell than mushrooms, I think.
I love that ending to the episode, It's
do too.
It's that ultimate all is forgiven,
Yes.
Giving them the mushrooms. It's great.
I do. I love that. It is you're right. It is exactly that. And it comes from Mrs. Maggot with her compliments.
Mm-hmm.
I also like how Maggot has calling everybody by name. Frodo, Merry, earlier Pippin, but not Sam. He's never called Sam by his name.
by name. I know.
He's just included in the and all.
Yep.
That's terrible.
He's included and sometimes is the sum total of the end all.
Oh,
yeah.
Man. That's good stuff.
Well, I've got a little bit of word nerdery here on this interesting little word, worrit.
Yes, I
Mrs.
hope
Maggot
you
will
might.
be worriting. Most folks can probably figure out what this means just from the context, but worrit is actually documented in the Oxford English Dictionary as a late 18th, maybe 19th century term for worry, and the OED says it's apparently a vulgar alteration. And when they say vulgar, they don't mean profane,
mean common, not
offensive.
profane.
They
Right,
mean common.
right.
Yeah.
Good
So
point.
that is a real word, and it's not
Yes.
something that Tolkien rescued from the dustbin of history. It's in the OED.
And it's not even in the dustbin. It's only a couple hundred years old.
That's true. Yeah.
It's just archaic in the sense that nobody
Right.
uses it anymore.
Right. I also love his all's well as ends well. Maggot's got a handful of these phrases he uses that are almost what we say. They're almost common expressions to us.
Yeah, you've mentioned that. That's true.
But, obviously this is a slightly different, maybe more rustic version of the familiar proverb, all's well that ends well. I just wanted to bring this one up just because, for a long time, I thought this was a phrase that Shakespeare invented. Shakespeare wrote a play called All's Well That Ends Well. I think that was in the early 1600s. The phrase is actually much older than that. The familiar version of the proverb was documented in 1546 by John Haywood, who was a compiler of proverbs. We've talked about his book before on the show.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I remember that.
So it appears in that 1546, but actually, again, thank you, OED, versions of this saying go back as far as 1250.
Wow.
So definitely a well-established proverb in the English language.
Boy, you're not kidding. That is a while.
So yeah, just a little bit of word nerdery for you there, because I always like to have some word nerdery for you.
Always start out that way, we end with it.
That's
In
right.
fact, it looks like we have some mushrooms and hopefully bacon that we can enjoy on our way to, I don't know, unmasking a conspiracy. Join us again next week as we begin, no surprise here, a conspiracy unmasked.
It's a very sophisticated segue there, Alan. Well played.
I try.
Well, folks, before we get to Barliman's bag, we want to take a minute to remind you about the Fellowship of the Podcast. That's our family of supporters over at Patreon. We're very close to our next goal, possibly over it by the time this episode actually releases, of setting up a Discord server. And that's going to give our patrons a chance to listen in live during a recording. There will be plenty of opportunity to laugh at our slip-ups and bad jokes, not to mention get a sneak peek at an upcoming episode.
That's right. And like Sean said, we might even be there now. We just weren't there then now when we recorded this episode now then.
I like that you figured out how to express that. That's good.
The past me wishes the future you to consider. No, our patrons are going to enjoy that Discord server. I'm not sure we will.
Possibly more than us. Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an absolute abject humiliation on a regular basis. But people like that when it's not them. So,
yes.
Get your share of Schadenfreude. Come on over and laugh at us. But in order to do that, you're going to have to visit patreon.com/prancingponypod. And when you join the Fellowship of the Podcast at the Gift of Gondor level or higher, you're going to get access to our exclusive content there as well. Full-length bonus episodes every quarter and short postscripts to each of our chapter-based episodes.
That's right. And if you're in the market for a new Tolkien book, please check out the official library pages at our website, theprancingponypodcast.com. There we've put together a set of links for our listeners to all the Tolkien books we've ever mentioned on the show. And if you wouldn't mind posting a review on iTunes also, we'd be grateful for that.
Yes, we would.
Again, I know I say this in every episode, but it really does increase our visibility, help us find new listeners, help new listeners find us. And that gives us more great questions for Barliman, gives us more discussion on social media. It just grows this Tolkien community that we're trying to grow. And that's really what it's all about for us.
It is indeed. And I also say this every episode, but we are still asking you to please share us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, wherever you hang out and might find Tolkien fans. Tell them about our show. Now with that, it is time for Barliman's mailbag. What does he have for us tonight?
All right. Well, folks may notice that we've spent a good bit of time in recent episodes talking about Gollum's, well, let's call it his orc-assisted escape from Thranduil's prison in Mirkwood. It came up in episode 103. That was part of our Meanwhile Elsewhere in Middle-earth segment. It came up again last episode, just 107,
last week,
when we talked about the Nazgul looking for Gollum and finding the old Stour villages deserted. Well, we're going to get a chance to talk about it again, which is awesome. I really love when we get these little conversations started, especially on these lesser-known details of the story. Always super cool.
Yeah.
So, actually, before episode 103 was released, Tara D. in Maryland wrote in with some questions about this event, and here they are. She said, first of all, why did Sauron have Gollum removed from Elvish custody? Did Gollum then escape the orcs and a possible appointment in the Dark Tower and flee to Moria of his own accord? Or did the Orcish Uber service drop him there intentionally? Nicely done, Tara.
I think they preferred Lyft.
Or did Sauron have something entirely different in mind? If Gollum started following the Fellowship in Moria at Sauron's behest, how is it that the spies of Mordor, who surely would have been watching him closely, lost track of him such that they were completely unaware of the ring's entrance into Mordor via Shelob's Foyer? Or did Gollum indeed serve Sauron's will at Amon Hen, alerting the orcs of both Mordor and Isengard to the presence of the ring-bearer? In that case, of course, the failure of the orcs to capture the ring was hardly Gollum's fault, but he would certainly continue following it on his own time. Wonderful phrasing, Tara. Thank you very much. Alan, why don't you start?
I'm still giggling at Shelob's Foyer.
Isn't that great?
That's very clever.
That's the one I was thinking of.
All right, fine. I'll start. In response to the first question about why Sauron ordered his orcs to help Gollum escape and why did he break him out, we talked in episode 103 about how that was part of his 1-2 punch to make the wise believe that he was starting his war a little bit early. But what motive did he have for springing Gollum from jail? Well, the hunt for the ring. We go back to that again, as we will, I suspect. which is in Unfinished Tales. That says that sometime around late May, Sauron heard the disquieting news that the wise were aware of Gollum, and that Gandalf had passed into Thranduil's realm. Hoping to alarm his enemies and disturb their councils with the fear of war, which he did not intend to make for some time, he attacked Thranduil and Gondor at about the same time. He had these two additional objects: to capture or kill Gollum, or at least to deprive his enemies of him, and to force the passage of the bridge of Osgiliath. Well, clearly his purpose in springing Gollum then was to get him as far away from Gandalf and his other enemies, of course, before they could use him or get more information from him than they already had. He wanted to capture or kill Gollum, so he must not have had really any further plans for him. He just wanted him out of the equation. He knew too much.
Yeah, he just wanted him gone. He just wanted to make sure that, Gandalf and, the good guys didn't get a hold of him again.
Right. No more interrogation, no more fear of fire.
Yeah.
We don't want him to spill any more of those beans.
Right.
On Bam Furlong. Sorry.
I'm imagining, I was imagining like a big pot of beans, like,
yes.
Big pot of like good chili beans. Although I'm from Texas and I shouldn't like chili with beans, but I do.
That's right. Your chili is just all meat, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And all of our Texan listeners are probably thinking, what? You eat chili with beans in it? Yes, I am not a native Texan. But I digress. It's
that we do.
Kind of a thing here.
It is.
But so I guess that alone should tell us that, any ideas of like an ulterior motive, Sauron having further plans for Gollum or, wanting Gollum to lead him to the Fellowship or anything like that. That just wasn't in his plans. He really just wanted to get him out of the equation.
Yeah.
So I think that does kind of address some of Tara's other questions. I think to answer one other one, Gollum actually did manage to escape the orcs. He wasn't set free. He wasn't sent to Moria on some special errand. In fact, the very next page in The Hunt for the Ring, after what you were reading, tells that he escaped the orcs and eluded the hunt of Sauron by swimming across the Anduin, and then, still hunted by elves, he escaped into Moria in the autumn of 3018. And he was totally on his own mission then, and he was really just trying to get away, trying to escape.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually began to follow the Fellowship when they entered into Moria through the West Gate on, isn't this funny? Didn't really even plan this, but January 13th, 3019.
Wow.
I know.
1,000 years from now on today, if we were in the Third Age.
Yeah. Isn't that a crazy coincidence? Yeah.
The very date this episode is being released. Huh. Well, it turns out that Gollum was very fortunate the Fellowship happened by when they did. Gollum was unable to get out of Moria through that west door, the door that even Gandalf could barely open, even if he used Pippin's head to do so. The detail, if I recall it correctly in Unfinished Tales, was that door required two people to open it. And they always kept a dwarf guard there when Moria was functioning. And that without two people, you couldn't have opened it. So he couldn't get out.
Sounds right.
They get in, and it's fortunate for him that they did. Tolkien actually wrote that he got lost in Moria and was actually starving. The lure of the ring, when the Fellowship came through, allowed him to find his way back out. Tolkien says it was thus a piece of singular good fortune for Gollum that the 9 walkers arrived when they did.
Yeah, a little bit of a eucatastrophe for Gollum, which led to a greater eucatastrophe later on, didn't it?
That it did.
Pretty cool. Great questions, Tara. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, Alan, we've got time for one more, don't we?
I think we do. Our old friend Frederick in Sweden wrote in to ask, I have a question about Sauron. Did he know that the only way to destroy the ring was to cast it into the fire where it was made? If he did know, why did he not secure at least that part of Mount Doom more? And if he did not know, how could Gandalf find out? Or Saruman, maybe the movies are messing with my memory, and not Sauron? Good question. Sean?
This is a good one, and it leads us into speculation territory, which is always fun. And I'll start by saying I have seen a lot of debate online, where all the most highbrow debates of our age take place, about whether Mount Doom's fire really is the only way to destroy the ring. There's certainly been discussions on that. I'm just going to go ahead and say that we kind of have to take it on faith that it is the only way.
True.
That is kind of a central premise of the book.
Rather,
so
yes.
we kind of have to start from that point. And Gandalf even says that even though the other rings of power might have been destroyed by Dragonfire, even Encalagon the Black couldn't destroy the One Ring. So the question is why? Is it because Mount Doom is the hottest place in Arda, or is it something magical? Is it something relating to Mount Doom being a source of, or maybe more like a focus for Sauron's power or something like that? I lean towards the latter. I noticed as I was kind of researching the answer for this, I noticed that in The Shadow of the Past, when Gandalf switches from talking about the other rings of power to talking about the One Ring, he actually stops using the word melt and starts saying destroy.
Oh.
I believe, this is very, very subtle, but I believe that what Gandalf and Tolkien are trying to tell us is that even Encalagon's heat would not melt the ring, because I think it just can't be melted. I think it can't be undone by heat because it was made by Sauron himself. And so it's not a matter of it being having a melting point above a certain threshold, but of some magical property of invulnerability that it has.
Wow. That makes sense. I mean, the One Ring seems resistant to heat entirely because it doesn't even heat up in Frodo's fireplace. Look, I know we talked about this. Even though that fire isn't hot enough to melt gold, the fact is it should at least warm up an object thrown into it.
Right.
The fact that it could sit there for a while and he could pull the ring out and say, hold it in your hand, it's quite cool. How is that possible? It seems, like you said, to be a magical invulnerability to actual heat.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't even heat it up, so it seems like you couldn't melt it. So if we accept all that, and we accept that the ring's indestructibility is not a matter of melting point, but it's a matter of some power Sauron put into it, well, then I have to assume that Sauron did know that Mount Doom was the only place it could be destroyed, because he knew that's where he made it.
Where did I make that ring again? Where did I do that? Was I by the Anduin? No, there was fire involved. Where was I? Anyway.
Yeah, I would think he would remember, don't you think?
He probably did.
Fairly significant event in his history. It's kind of like, knowing how much he loves the ring, it would probably be like forgetting where you were married.
Hey, Siri, in 500 years, remind me where I made the ring.
There you go.
Anyway.
But I think in response to one of Frederick's questions there, the reason he didn't put a guard around Mount Doom to prevent anybody from bringing the ring there to destroy it is quite simply because he didn't imagine anyone would ever try to destroy it. That's true. Remember Gandalf's words in The White Rider in Book 3. Gandalf says, "Indeed, he is in great fear, not knowing what mighty one may suddenly appear, wielding the ring and assailing him with war, seeking to cast him down and take his place. That we should wish to cast him down and have no one in his place is not a thought that occurs to his mind. That we should try to destroy the ring itself has not yet entered into his darkest dream."
That's true. Man, and very important. No, he can't even conceive that anybody would turn that down.
Mm-hmm.
In that same paragraph, Gandalf makes it clear that Sauron made a mistake by assuming that he needed to send his armies out to war instead of guarding his own realm. Mm-hmm. And here's the quote. "Imagining war, he has let loose war, believing that he has no time to waste. For he that strikes the first blow, if he strikes it hard enough, may need to strike no more. So the forces that he has long been preparing, he is now setting in motion, sooner than he intended. Wise fool! For if he had used all his power to guard Mordor, so that none could enter, and bent all his guile to the hunting of the ring, then indeed hope would have faded. Neither ring nor bearer could long have eluded him."
That's right. So it actually is a bit of good fortune for the good guys that he didn't think anyone would try to destroy it, and so he left it unguarded. Bit of good chance, if chance you call it.
If chance you call it, indeed. Well, folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Please join us again next week when we visit some really weird hobbits, ones who know how to swim and who lock their doors at night.
That is odd. Well, folks, thanks again for listening, and thank you for making our common room on Facebook such a fun place to spend time. We want every one of you to be a part of this conversation, and it does not stop when the episode ends. So see the comments, questions, corrections, and all the other fun stuff on Facebook at The Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
That's right. And as always, a truly very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier. We want to thank DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Emily in Texas, and Chad in Texas for your kind contributions.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your baskets of mushrooms, but only if they include bacon, to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com, and we'll try to eat them on our next show.
There you go.
Well, however long we've had, still far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.